Hello, everybody, and welcome to History Bite number 248, dated May the 11th, 2021. I'm Walter, your mobile historian and blue-collar scholar. This History Bite is entitled The Supreme Court Appointments of President George W. Bush. George W. Bush, a Republican, served as the 43rd President of the United States of America from January 20th, 2001 to January 20th, 2009. During his 2 terms in the White House, President Bush was able to appoint 2 individuals to the Supreme Court of the United States, both in his 2nd term, and literally at the same time, a unique circumstance that does not happen very often. In making his 2 Supreme Court appointments, President Bush replaced the following judicial legends. First, Justice Sandra Day OConnor, who announced her retirement in July of 2005 after 24 years of distinguished and most admirable service on the Supreme Court. She had been appointed to the court in 1981 by President Ronald Reagan, the first woman to ever serve on the Supreme Court. But of course, you knew that already. And he also replaced Chief Justice William Hubbs Rehnquist. Rehnquist died in September of 2005 after a very lengthy battle with esophageal cancer, something that he had been fighting for the better part of a year at that point. In spite of it all, Rehnquist had refused to step down from the bench, even though he was largely unable to fulfill most of his duties as Chief Justice at that point, with a great deal of duties being assumed by then Senior Associate Justice John Paul Stevens. So with the death of Chief Justice Rehnquist, that opened the door for another vacancy for President Bush. At the same time, Justice O'Connor had announced her retirement a couple of months earlier. Now, I'd just like to mention that all of this I remember pretty well. I was in my very early 20s, during this time period, 2004, 2005, and, my infatuation with the Supreme Court, certainly, led me to absorb all of this, and the appointments of President Bush, were very interesting to say the least. So let's get to it. So on July 1st, 2005, Justice Sandra Day OConnor, like I said, announced her retirement from the Supreme Court of the United States. All right. And, she announced her reasons for retiring to take care of her ailing husband. All right. O'Connor, like I said, had been appointed to the court in 1981 by President Reagan. And at the time she announced her retirement, she was 75 years old. All right. So President Bush moved fairly quickly to nominate another individual to replace her. And he considered a litany of different federal judges, including J. Michael Luttig and Emilio Garza. But, he was warned that these 2 men in specific would definitely be filibustered. And he also considered Fifth Circuit judges Edith Brown and Edith Jones. All right. But ultimately, he centered on U.S. Court of Appeals for the District of Columbia Judge John Glover Roberts. Roberts himself had been appointed to that court by President Bush 2 years earlier and had a very reputable record as a conservative litigator. All right. Roberts' nomination actually came as a surprise to many people, as most would logically have been expecting Bush to appoint another woman to replace O'Connor, the first woman on the court in history. But alas, that did not happen. and situations moved forward. So Roberts' confirmation hearings were set to begin in early September 2005, okay? Fast forward 2 months, all right? On September 3rd, 2005, Chief Justice William Rehnquist passed away. Like I said, after a very long, protracted battle with esophageal cancer, all right? If I didn't mention it earlier, Rehnquist had been appointed to the court in 1972 as an associate justice by President Richard Nixon, okay? He served in that capacity until 1986, when he was elevated by President Ronald Reagan to be Chief Justice of the United States. Rehnquist served as Chief Justice of the United States for 19 years, from 1986 to 2005, okay? Establishing a track record as a, reliably conservative and very stare decisis adhering conservative, all right? Rehnquist was definitely both Nixon and Reagan's home run for a strict constructionist, all right? And I'd also like to mention that these two departures from the court, the retirement of Justice O'Connor and the death of Chief Justice Rehnquist, were the first vacancies on the court in 11 years. The last time a Supreme Court vacancy occurred before this time was in 1994 with the retirement of Justice Harry Blackmun, who was of course succeeded by Justice Stephen Breyer, who continues to serve to this very day. But with the appointment of Breyer in 1994, the Supreme Court went 11 years without a vacancy, one of the longest periods in the court's history. As a matter of fact, that was the longest period since roughly the 1810s into the early 1820s. I believe the period was from around 1812 to 1823. There were no vacancies on the Supreme Court. So that's roughly around 12 years, a long time with no vacancy. But alas, back to the subject at hand. With Rehnquist's sudden death, all right, 3 days later, September 6th, thereabouts, President Bush decided to nominate Roberts, who initially was to be O'Connor's replacement, to be Chief Justice of the United States in place of the deceased William Hubbs Rehnquist, all right? I'd also like to point out that Roberts had also served as a clerk for then Associate Justice Rehnquist in the court's 1980 term, all right? Interesting fact, Roberts would be Rehnquist's clerk for the court's 1980 to 81 term specifically. So, like I said, that therefore meant that Bush had to withdraw Roberts' nomination to replace O'Connor, and thus, everything now had to focus on his nomination to be Chief Justice, all right? And his hearings, which were actually set to begin that week, were pushed forward another week and began accordingly, all right? So there wasn't a significant amount of opposition to Roberts' nomination. I mean, there was certainly opposition to it, given his record, as a conservative litigator. But the opposition was nowhere near as much as it would be with his next nomination, which we'll get to soon enough, okay? You have to understand why you must observe the politics of the Supreme Court. Roberts' nomination was a conservative replacing another conservative, all right? Roberts for Rehnquist would not change the composition of the court at that time in any way, shape, or form, all right? Roberts was a committed conservative, just like his predecessor in office, and thus, if there was a case to be made to destroy this nomination, send it to the gutter, it was not to be done at this time, okay? This was not the nominee to spill blood over, All right. And, Roberts' confirmation hearings lasted for about a week. And, his views on all the primary issues, affirmative action, gay rights, federalism, abortion, were obtained. Okay. And respectively, Roberts would find himself confirmed by the Senate on September 29th, 2005, by a vote of 78 to 22. All right. You might find it interesting that former President Barack Obama, who was serving as a U.S. Senator at the time, Democrat from Illinois, voted against Roberts' confirmation as Chief Justice. Just thought I'd like to put that in there if you wanted to know that little fact. All right? 'Tis no matter. It's all politics, right? So at that point, Roberts became Chief Justice, and he was administered the oath of office by then Senior Associate Justice John Paul Stevens. All right? So that then put Bush back on line for the O'Connor nomination, which had largely fell by the wayside. All right. And, Roberts, was actually, like I said, the more peaceful of the two nominations. So with him out of the way, Bush then once again began to look for nominees to fill O'Connor's seat, and he implied that he would pick a woman or a minority to fill this seat, which certainly would be very appealing to, certainly to Democrats and arguably to a large amount of Republicans. So Bush his first choice to nominate someone to fill O'Connor's seat after withdrawing Roberts was White House counsel Harriet Meyers. Oh my word. Now, I only say that because when he nominated her on October 3rd, 2005, the opposition to her nomination by Bush's own party was immense. Okay? Republicans were absolutely disgusted by the nomination of Meyers, viewing her as entirely unqualified for the Supreme Court. Nothing more than a crony of Bush, only receiving this appointment due to her loyalty to the president over the years, and essentially that she was not anyone with a demonstrable conservative record as a strict constructionist judge. All right. Meyers had never served in judicial office, and that was something else they used against her. President Bush had made it quite clear early on when he was running for president back in 2000 and in 2004 when he ran for re-election that he wanted to appoint strict constructionist judges to the Supreme Court, judges in the mold of then Justice Antonin Scalia, as well as currently serving Justice Clarence Thomas, who had been appointed by his father in 1991. All right. So in the eyes of many conservative Republicans, Meyers met none of these qualifications because she had no track record and had no real experience in dealing with constitutional law. Indeed, even many Democrats were not exactly impressed with her, though they certainly were more willing to give her a shot than most Republicans. All right. They viewed her as somehow, perhaps she was the type who could be persuaded. All right. Democrats, weren't as vehemently against the nomination of Meyers as the Republicans. And like I said, the opposition lasted for a great deal of time, almost the whole month of October of 2005. All right. Until October 27th, when Bush withdrew Meyers' nomination at her request, realizing that she would never likely be confirmed. And even if she was confirmed, it would take an, epic battle to get her through. All right. Because Justice Sandra Day OConnor was a swing vote on the court for, most of the previous decade on the bench. All right. Filling her seat was not going to be simple. All right. And no matter whom the president appointed to replace her, it would likely change the direction of the court. If he appointed someone substantially more conservative than O'Connor, the court would obviously be pushed to the right. If he appointed someone more liberal than O'Connor, then the court would be pushed to the left. That's how it works when you're replacing a swing vote justice. All right. And that's exactly what Sandra Day OConnor was. For all intents and purposes, by the time she retired in 2005, okay, she was certainly more inclined to vote in the left direction with respect to most of the major issues of the day. All right. Only recently, she had joined the majority of the court in 2003 to strike down the very anti-gay sodomy laws in the case of Lawrence versus Texas. And also in that term, in 2003, she had written the court's majority opinion in Grutter versus Bollinger, upholding affirmative action in law schools, okay? Colleges and universities, excuse me, all right? Gratz was the law schools. Gratz versus Bollinger was the law school. Grutter versus Bollinger was colleges, all right? And she had written the majority opinion in Grutter, all right, upholding the use of race-based affirmative action in college as constitutional, college admissions, all right? Yeah, I remember all of that, folks. Yep, I'm old. I remember when all of those decisions came down. I was like 18, 19 years old at the time, and, it was great victory. Awesome time period. So, with Meyers' nomination withdrawn, all right, Bush, just a few days later, all right, seeking more than anything to appeal to his base, which he had clearly alienated with the nomination of Meyers, he chose U.S. Court of Appeals for the Third Circuit Judge Samuel Anthony Alito. All right. Indeed, Samuel Anthony Alito, all right, now, of course, Justice Alito, was a very, very conservative judge on the Third Circuit Court of Appeals, all right, and had, in his 15 years on that court, had a more than demonstrable conservative track record, something that would certainly please his hardcore right-wing base. All right. And that's exactly who was pleased, his hardcore right-wing base. But just about everybody else was opposed to the choice of Alito to replace moderate Justice Sandra Day OConnor. All right. And numerous special interest groups, the ACLU, lots of abortion rights groups, and civil rights groups in their opposition came out, to express their their outrage at someone like Alito being nominated to replace Sandra Day OConnor, all right? This was the time to spill blood over a nominee. And like I said, his nomination was very controversial. Alito was raked over the coals, all right? And like I said, you have to understand the politics of the Supreme Court. Alito is a far-right conservative, very, very committed conservative, originalist, replacing a very, very moderate justice. So yeah, sparks are going to fly. And they did indeed fly. There was significant opposition to him being nominated. And, although he handled the Senate confirmation hearings very well, they brought his wife to tears. All right. I'm just remembering all of this from CNN years ago. All right. And, so with his nomination on October 31st, 2005, Alito's process would last arguably, without, cessation in the media for the next few months. And when the Senate finally did vote on his confirmation, it was by a most narrow party line vote of 58 to 42 to confirm him on January 31st, 2006, all right? And he was sworn in that same day accordingly and attended President Bush's State of the Union, all right? So that completed the Supreme Court appointments of President George W. Bush, Chief Justice John Glover Roberts in 2005, and Justice Samuel Anthony Alito in early January 2006, okay? So let's talk about these two guys for a second. Now, we'll start with Chief Justice Roberts. like I said before, Chief Justice John Roberts, already had a conservative track record before getting to the Supreme Court. He had been a conservative litigator. He was a conservative judge on the D.C. Circuit. And to the present day, now in his 16th year on the Supreme Court as its Chief Justice, can't believe it's been 16 years already. Wow. He has demonstrated a overwhelmingly, reliably conservative track record. But Chief Justice Roberts is not, nor has he ever been, an ideologue. An ideologue is an individual who rigidly conforms to a particular ideology, no matter whether it is correct or incorrect, and regardless of whether or not the outcomes in supporting that ideology are good or bad. You are rigid, unwavering, and Roberts is anything but. Instead, he is a moderate conservative, and always has been. Roberts has never been 100% committed to the conservative cause on the Supreme Court, which has led to detractors, many of whom supported his nomination years ago. Roberts, unlike many conservatives, realizes that his decisions have real-world effects on people. And unlike many conservatives, Roberts understands that it is very unwise to commit to an ideology just for the heck of doing so without taking into account the effects that your decisions have. In that way, you could call him a conservative positivist, okay? I take that back. A conservative realist, okay? Rather than a conservative formalist, like Justices Alito, Thomas, and Gorsuch. Roberts is a conservative realist who, although while overwhelmingly a committed conservative, Roberts certainly views the effects of his decisions, before he makes them. He understands that we're not just making a decision and that's it. These decisions affect millions of people, hundreds of millions of people. Okay, it doesn't just end with me signing off on a 34-page opinion and that's it. I don't ever have to worry about it again, come what may. My decisions have effects on people, and that's the type of jurist Roberts is, and arguably always has been. But it was largely ignored in the beginning, okay? But a very observant court watcher could certainly see it. But it was certainly noticed and something that has been used against him, arguably, ever since 2012, when he cast the deciding vote to affirm the constitutionality of President Obama's signature healthcare law, otherwise known as the Affordable Care Act, okay? The law itself had come under direct challenge, all right? And petitioners had been asking the Supreme Court to strike it down, all right? And it came very close to being struck down, all right? But for the vote of Chief Justice John Roberts. Roberts had sustained the Affordable Care Act by referring to it as a tax, something that President Obama, ironically, had strongly attempted to convince the American people that it wasn't a tax. But for Chief Justice Roberts, that was the singular thing which provided for him to be able to affirm its constitutionality by referring to the Affordable Care Act as a tax, okay? And ever since that time, conservatives have all been all but done with Chief Justice Roberts, all right? They viewed him as a traitor to the conservative cause, even though overwhelmingly he is certainly a conservative with very moderate leanings, one of his key decisions, which I think is most displeasing to me, was his majority opinion in the 2013 case Shelby County versus Holder, striking down a very important section of the Voting Rights Act of 1965. That decision essentially gutted the requirement of those states covered under that portion of the act to seek federal approval before making changes to their voting practices and procedures. All right. And that is very disappointing decision, Shelby County versus Holder, which he authored the majority opinion. And hopefully that if a similar issue were to come before the court in the future, he would feel differently about it. All right. But in any case, Chief Justice Roberts, unlike his fellow conservatives on the Supreme Court, is not an ideologue. He is a moderate conservative who certainly takes the human factor into account before he makes his final determination. And as such, Roberts' vote is not predictable. All right. Certainly not as much as it used to be. All right. Roberts' vote is up in the air. And for a small amount of time, he was arguably in the court's center. All right. You didn't, and you still arguably don't quite know which way he's going to go on a given case. And that's good. That means it will be hell to replace him whenever he does retire from the court. All right. But overall, I am not displeased with the service of Chief Justice Roberts. And he certainly gives the law a much more human touch than his predecessor, William Rehnquist. So that's Chief Justice John Roberts. Now to Justice Samuel Alito. All right, now Justice Alito. This guy is certainly a committed conservative. He is what the Republicans would call a home run. He is what he describes himself as a practical originalist. All right, and he has hardly ever broken ranks with his conservative colleagues. All right. A notable case in 2011 where he did break ranks involved a First Amendment issue of whether or not it was okay to protest at funerals. And Alito was the only dissenter, holding the First Amendment does not cover this type of speech. This is provocative action. All right. And, but overwhelmingly, this is a rare defection for Alito in breaking with his conservative colleagues that he votes with more than 99% of the time. All right. He has written, indeed, some of the most conservative opinions to come from the Supreme Court in recent years, including, but not limited to, McDonald versus Chicago in 2008, which extended the Second Amendment right to keep and bear arms to the states via the 14th Amendment's due process clause. The Burwell versus Hobby Lobby case, which you might remember, a case involving the ability of providers under the Affordable Care Act to deal with contraceptive coverage. All right, and the court essentially carved them out as an exception. The Hobby Lobby case was a interesting one, to say the least. As well as the Janus versus AFSCME case, all right, involving the ability of individuals who do not want to belong to unions to not have to pay to not have to pay for any union membership, all right? Basically opening the door for individuals not to be a part of a union if they don't want to be, and certainly not have to pay to be a part of a union if they don't want to be, all right? Those cases, are covered accordingly in their own separate insights. But, he has certainly pushed the law in a much more conservative direction with respect to numerous areas, all right? And he certainly is the opposite of what many would have loved to see replace Sandra Day OConnor. Sandra Day OConnor would certainly have voted to affirm the Voting Rights Act's provisions in Shelby County, all right? And this is just one case, but in numerous cases, OConnor would have been much more sympathetic to the other side than Alito was. He certainly is a diehard criminal law conservative, all right, much more conservative than OConnor and even Scalia while they served together, Justice Alito is definitely a conservative dream on the Supreme Court. And unlike Chief Justice Roberts, in the eyes of diehard conservatives, like I said, Alito has been a home run. Okay, so those are President Bush's two Supreme Court appointments. Chief Justice John Roberts, who has served on the court from September 29, 2005 to the present day, and Justice Samuel Anthony Alito, who has served on the court from January 31st, 2006 to the present day. If you have any questions or controversies, leave them down below. I'll be happy to answer them. If you gained a little bit of insight or enjoyment, and learned something from this video, drop me a like. I'd greatly appreciate that. And last but not least, if you have not subscribed to my channel, I'd highly appreciate it if you did so now. Just hit that little red subscribe button and we will be in business. Again, I appreciate all of you for listening to me ramble for these 30 minutes. And like I said, I hope you learned something. That's the whole point of these videos, all right? Take care. Stay safe out there. And I'll talk to you at the next bite. Peace.